July 2026, Dallas, Texas. The heat was suffocating, pressing down on 80,000 people who had come, in some private and unspoken way, not merely to watch a football match, but to witness an ending. Nobody said the word aloud, nobody needed to. It hung in the humid air above the pitch like something already grieved. The way a room feels different, the moment everyone in it knows a difficult conversation is coming, long before anyone has said a single word. Because the night before, in a quiet press room that smelled stale coffee and old carpet, a 41-year-old man had said something he had spent 20 years refusing to say. That this, whatever was about to happen on this pitch, under this sun, against this opponent, might be the last time the world would ever see him wear his country's colors at a World Cup. He had smiled when he said it. That was the cruelest part. Men do not usually smile at their own endings. But then, this was never an ordinary man, and this was never going to be an ordinary ending. To understand what was lost in Dallas, you must first understand what had been built, brick by brick, goal by goal, across 2 decades of relentless, almost obsessive pursuit. In 2006, a slender boy from the island of Madeira stepped onto a World Cup pitch for the very first time. He was flamboyant, unfinished, occasionally infuriating, a talent still arguing with itself about what kind of player it wished to become. There were stepovers that dazzled and frustrated in equal measure, a petulance that bordered on self-indulgence, and beneath it all, a hunger so ferocious that even his harshest critics could sense something extraordinary quietly assembling itself. Nobody in that stadium could have known they were watching the opening scene of one of football's longest and most punishing love stories. 6 tournaments. 6 versions of the same man, each one carrying a little more weight than the last, the weight of expectation, the weight of a small footballing nation that had built its entire sporting identity around his shoulders, the weight of chasing the one trophy that had always, somehow, slipped through his fingers, no matter how tightly he closed his hand around it. He had won everything a club footballer could win. Champions Leagues, lifted beneath fireworks in stadiums half a world apart. Ballons d'Or, collected like punctuation marks at the end of ever more impossible seasons. A continental crown for his country too, lifted in 2016 from the bench, injured, weeping into a towel while his teammates finished the job without him. A strange, almost cruel irony that his nation's greatest triumph should arrive with him, watching from the sidelines, rather than delivering it himself. But the World Cup, football's oldest and cruelest mountain, the one trophy that has humbled kings and geniuses alike, remained stubbornly unconquered. Why does this particular tournament resist even the greatest players so completely? Why has the game's most individually gifted man never once been able to bend this one competition entirely to his will? By the summer of 2026, he was 41 years old, an age at which most footballers have long since become commentators, coaches, distant memories summoned only by nostalgic highlight reels. And yet there he stood, in the searing Texan heat, still chasing the one ghost that had haunted him since Madeira, still lacing his boots with the same private, stubborn belief that this time, perhaps, would finally be different. The road to Dallas had not been glorious. Portugal had stumbled through their group stage, held to an opening draw by DR Congo, a result that stunned a nation accustomed to comfortable progress, laboring past Uzbekistan with a performance short on conviction, before being held again, this time by Colombia, in a match that raised more questions than it answered. They finished second in their group, a position that, in football's unforgiving bracket, meant a harder road and earlier reckoning, and now, an opponent that history had always found deeply uncomfortable to face. Spain arrived in Dallas a different beast entirely. The reigning European champions, ruthless and fluent, having scored 8 goals across their opening 3 matches without conceding a single one. Their football was quick, intricate, almost cruelly effortless, the kind of football that makes opposition defenses look a half step slow even when they are not. And walking among them, barely older than a schoolboy, was a name that made the entire tragedy of this match unbearably poetic. Lamine Yamal was not yet born when Cristiano Ronaldo first stepped onto a World Cup pitch. Let that settle for a moment. An entire human life had been lived. Birth, childhood, adolescence, a meteoric rise to global stardom inside the span of Ronaldo's World Cup career alone. Ronaldo was not merely playing Spain that afternoon. He was playing time itself, and time, as it always eventually does, was playing to win. And so the 2 eras stood side by side in the tunnel before kickoff, waiting for the same whistle, one man playing to close a story that had defined his entire adult life, the other playing, without quite realizing it yet, to begin one of his own. For long, agonizing stretches, it seemed as though fate might for once be merciful. Portugal's goalkeeper, Diogo Costa, became the unlikely hero of the afternoon's early exchanges, denying Lamine Yamal with one outstretched hand, low and instinctive, then somehow reacting in time moments later to deny another effort that seemed, for half a second, destined for the net. Every save felt like a small, temporary postponement of the inevitable, the goalkeeping equivalent of holding a door shut against a wind that refuses to relent. Ronaldo himself tested the Spanish goal early, a low shot drifting narrowly wide of the far post, the crowd rising and falling with him as though attached by some invisible thread, strung between 80,000 hearts and one aging pair of boots. But why, you might ask, did the greatest goalscorer of his generation suddenly find the net so unforgiving, so reluctant to yield to him the way it once had, almost without asking? Perhaps it was simply age, the slow and undramatic erosion that comes for every athlete eventually. Perhaps it was something crueler still, the particular tax that time charges those who have spent it all, without reservation, on greatness. Then, barely minutes into the second half, misfortune arrived in its favorite disguise, an injury, sudden and unglamorous. Nuno Mendes, Portugal's left-back, was forced off the pitch, clutching his leg, and with him went a piece of the defensive solidity that had kept this match, against all reasonable odds, still level. Substitutions followed, formations shifted, and somewhere in that reshuffling, almost imperceptibly, the match began to tilt. The contest settled into something almost unbearable to watch, a slow, grinding tension, neither side quite able to land the decisive blow, the clock ticking toward a conclusion that felt, with every passing minute, more and more like a mercy that would never actually arrive. There is a particular kind of dread that builds in a football match heading toward its final minutes still level, a dread that has nothing to do with the scoreline and everything to do with knowing, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that someone somehow is about to be undone. 90 minutes came and went, the fourth official's board went up, stoppage time, 3 additional minutes added almost as an afterthought by the men keeping time in the stands. And in football, as in life, it is rarely the 90 minutes you remember most vividly in years to come. It is what happens in the 3 minutes nobody had properly prepared themselves for. Ferran Torres, introduced from the substitutes bench with fresh legs and a clear head, found space down the right-hand side. His pass was simple, almost gentle in its delivery. The kind of pass that does not announce, in the moment it is played, the history it is about to make. And there, arriving with perfect unhurried timing, was Mikel Merino, another substitute, sliding into the space with the calm efficiency of a man closing a door quietly behind him, careful not to wake whoever might still be sleeping inside. The ball crossed the line. Diogo Costa, who had given absolutely everything across 90-plus exhausting minutes, could only watch it happen, arms outstretched a fraction too late, the way a man reaches for something already falling past the point of catching. Spain erupted. An entire bench emptied itself onto the pitch in an instant, arms raised, disbelief and joy tangled together in the particular, chaotic way that only stoppage-time goals seem capable of producing, half celebration, half sheer relief that the waiting finally was over. And at the center of the frame, entirely still amid all that chaos, stood Cristiano Ronaldo, not shouting, not protesting to the referee as he so often had in younger, hungrier years. Simply standing, hands loosely on his hips, staring at a patch of grass that had, in one instant, become the most significant square meter of turf in his entire career. His body, it seemed, had already understood what his mind had not yet fully caught up to, that the story, after 20 years and 6 tournaments, had just been handed its final page, whether he was ready to read it or not. The referee's whistle sounded some minutes later. It was, by any objective measure, an entirely ordinary sound, the same 3 short bursts of air that end 10,000 football matches every single week, in every corner of the world, without ceremony or consequence. But this one carried something heavier than the others. This one carried an ending, folded quietly inside an otherwise unremarkable full-time whistle. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a legend's final whistle, not the silence of an empty stadium long after the crowds have gone home, but the stranger, heavier silence of 80,000 people simultaneously realizing in real time that they have just watched history quietly close its own book in front of them. Cristiano Ronaldo made his way slowly toward the tunnel. Nobody rushed him, nobody dared to. Teammates kept a respectful, almost reverent distance, the way people instinctively do around someone in the presence of genuine, private grief. There are moments in sport too large for consolation, too heavy for a hand on the shoulder or a few muttered words of comfort, and this, unmistakably, was one of them. 6 World Cups, 20 years, and at the end of all of it, no trophy. Only the quiet, haunting arithmetic of a career that gave everything to the game except the one single thing it always seemed determined to withhold from him, as though the sport itself had decided, early on, that even Cristiano Ronaldo would not be permitted to have it all. Was this the tragedy of one man's stubborn refusal to accept his own mortality, chasing a young man's dream deep into a body that could no longer quite deliver it? Or was it something nobler entirely, the simple, monumental cost of loving a game enough to keep returning to it, tournament after tournament, year after year, long after most men would have quietly made their peace with letting go? And somewhere in that same frame, barely visible amid Spain's wild celebration, stood the answer to a question nobody had thought to ask before kickoff. The torch, it seemed, had already been passed. Not through any ceremony, not through any deliberate gesture of respect between generations, but through pure indifferent circumstance, in the most ordinary and quietly devastating way that football has always handed down its inheritances, one abrupt ending at a time, Cristiano Ronaldo will return home from Dallas to a life that, by his own admission, needs for absolutely nothing. He has said more than once across countless interviews and press conferences over the years that football was never truly about need. It was about passion, a small, simple word that sounds almost too modest until you have watched a 41-year-old man chase it relentlessly through 6 World Cups across 2 full decades, against a world that grew visibly, undeniably younger around him with every single tournament that passed. Perhaps that is the real haunting truth buried inside this story. Not that Cristiano Ronaldo never won the World Cup, though that fact alone will follow him for the rest of his life. But that greatness, however monumental, however inevitable it once seemed destined to become, is still no match for time. And that even the most extraordinary careers ever assembled must, eventually, hear the very same final whistle as everyone else's. The record books will simply say, Spain 1, Portugal 0. A single line, cold and unremarkable, buried among thousands of other results across a century of tournaments. They will not say what else quietly ended in Dallas that stifling July afternoon. They will not record the stillness on his face, or the silence that followed him down the tunnel, or the particular ache of watching a boy not yet born when it all began complete, the ending that time had been patiently writing all along. But everyone who was there already knows, and so perhaps in that quiet moment, standing motionless on the pitch, staring at nothing in particular, did he?